and then walking forward in that light with that total freedom. And yet, how were they able to get there? They certainly needed virtue. They needed to have a mind that was less agitated as possible. And that's what being virtuous does. You don't steal something, you don't have to worry about all the other problems associated with stealing something. A lot of people underestimate that. They all just steal this thing right here, and then what? It's only a few minutes of aggravation. It's more complicated than that. It's more complicated than that. Your mind will return to it. It will put you in a state of mind of a thief, which also means it's putting yourself into a paranoid mind because you're a thief, you start seeing thieves. Thievery. And then you get drawn into that world, which is not a place of tranquility. Thieves rob tranquility, and so thieves rob themselves of tranquility. Tranquility is a condition. You get there by not being a thief, by not stealing, by not accepting or taking anything that is not yours. And so why do good practitioners make special note of not taking things that don't belong to them? Because it's the easy way of solving the potential problems, the mind states associated with the thieving mind. They ensure generosity by doing that. So they are fastidious. They're fastidious because they know it's that valuable. Because it's the generosity itself which is wealth. It's generosity towards themselves and others. And not the miserly mind, I'm going to take it, it's mine now. That's not giving back, that's also the wrong direction. And that's where we get back to these numbers people, the digit people. These are people who have lost their minds more or less to the point where they just focus on digits. Like perhaps they inherently feel that they're worthless, but if they have digits, that will be the compensation. If they have more digits than you, then it's a green light for them to completely discount you as a failure or not as good as them. So they're all in on the money and digit game. And so the people below them are also all in on the money and digit game. So there's this pool of slavery from the top to the bottom. And their God is their money. If I have more money, then I have more esteem. They really buy into this deception. And so they're caught like flies in a web, buzzing around. But if you crash through those webs, if you don't have that same bit of value structure, they notice you, even if you don't notice them noticing you, because there's so many snivelings that they expect. And they've come to be accustomed to within their minions that they can see someone who is not on their wavelength hundreds and thousands of miles away. But certainly within their presence, they expect to be treated like some type of Roman emperor, a deranged one, because they are deranged. They don't have morality in the godly sense. They have it in the worldly sense, which is to say, the devilish sense. And so, no, they don't have a lot of tranquility either. These people who've sold their souls over to these demons of greed to, to say it's a sadomasochistic relationship is, to put it mildly, really does go back and forth, up and down, how sadistic some of these greedy people are. Sadistically daft, certainly to themselves. And so just imagine, for perhaps just a second, how deranged their lives are by having such deranged values. And that what do the deranged futures all of these people put together create, manifest in time, in contemporary times. And then so you can also just think of them as manifesting into some toxic, odious blob. Something greedy, something bacterial is just jumping from one surface to the next, consuming it. For no other purpose than to own it. It's like someone buying a painting, owning it, but not properly caring for it, so it rots away just like they do from their greed. The demons of greed that keep them chained up like little toy poodles. Takes them for a walk on their little gold leashes. And so don't envy greedy people. Don't envy people who indulge their vices, because it's really their vices that are indulging in them. So what is powerful to be? It is to be in a worldly sense. It's like a powerful bowel movement, something like that, compared to what one can get on the other side of spiritual enlightenment. If there would be a comparison, which there really isn't. And yet the more dependent money, a society is on monetary systems that are led by these greedy forces, well, that's the extent to which it can atrophy, to which it can descend into the hell realms, where these companies just become orifices for which these classes of lunatics can gorge themselves on productive and innovative people that should have nothing to do with such idiocy, and yet are enslaved by it via these monetary mechanisms. So reconsidering what it is to live and how to live and where to live. Just look at all of the vicissitudes that have struck Kazan. Kazan is an older city than you might think. And politics, man, how much of a continuity can one see in Kazan over the last 3,000 years? If one is a historian. And then what does that suggest for our planet as a whole? If Kazan has risen and fallen as many times as it has. So what did our poor great-great-great-great-grandfathers and grandmothers do? How did they survive? Was it by following the digits or voting with their feet? What was it exactly? What combination is the way to go versus the way not to go? Should really put all of your tools in your tool kit and figure something out for yourself, because places and times and peoples and possibilities and impossibilities change as times go on. So whether you think it's right or not really doesn't matter all that much, except to the degree that you suffer because of your opinions your beliefs, perhaps your delusions. And yet, what is the good fight? Well, the good fight is when things don't have to get that far, where you can stop it in yourself individually, that you can be of assistance to others that are drowning, but not necessarily to jump where the big ship went down. Don't put yourself in the center of something you can't save without potentially endangering your own self. See, isn't that wrong, right thinking? See, it's right thinking, but it's a wrong way of right thinking, because you're trying to do more than you're capable of. So you're dooming yourself to failure. And so why would you do that if you were a compassionate person? Well, oh no, 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 the principles are more important, says the whip cracker. Keep going. This is the right way. If it doesn't look like the right way, it wouldn't be so compelling, would it? That's why we call it the wrong right way. It's right way with delusion on top. So yeah, complexity of problems. That shouldn't surprise us that we ourselves have a complexity that can be problematic. Why wouldn't that be the case? And yet, working with the complexity, the fallibility in a compassionate way is a lot better than the other way. It's also a wrong right view. Everything should be perfect. Yeah, sure. But it's not. And the fact that you must die one day, it's not a perfect world. It's not congruent with perfection, is it? So that was the conditionality of the beginning of your life, at inception to this very day, and yet this is the principle that so many deny. To be deluded, to be normally deluded, and therefore think up the importance of things that are really just nothing but delusional at the end of the day. And yet you can let them go. That's the good news. So don't end on a sour note. The light note, the musical note is dun dun dun, everything is this, everything is that. But at the end, you can let it go. And you should, and you can, and you will. And when you do, that's evolution. That's creating a new reality. That's living a new reality that isn't bound by materiality. So no, the materialists are not going to stamp your document and say, yes, here you go, sir. You've attained the next level. They can't do it. They don't have the means to do it. And so they dispute it exists because it puts their system in disrepute, makes them look foolish when they like being the practical type of person. Here, 1 brick plus 2 bricks is 3 bricks, see? They like that type of assurity of the truth. So when it comes to subjective matters, they're completely out of their element. It's something they don't like to be as practical, prodigious. So they dismiss it. Balderdash is what they say. Well, it is for them. But whether that thought defines them is not something they believe to be true. And whether or not it is, or whether they'll change their mind, it all just depends on factors outside of your and certainly their control. Especially when it's not them or theirs. Those bricks, they don't belong to you. But you think they do. At least certain bricks belong to you, don't they? You told yourself that. Somebody's told you that those bricks belong to you. You believe it. Well, when you're dead, whose bricks are they then? The next fools, I suppose. But if you're caught up in all that worldliness, all those digits, well, how can anything come of it in the end except for disastrous delusion? But in any case, no point on ending on a sour note. Don't ever do that. Do bask in the freedom instead. 171 billionaires in the United Kingdom. Not enough to fill a big red double-decker loony bus. Put them all on it. Let them drive around. Oh, look, do this, do that. I think this should be right. We should get rid of, sell these artifacts off of the British Museum on eBay for £40 because we have access to this cultural machinery that we despise. Put the 171 UK billionaires on the loony bus because apparently they're the ones that are running the politics. They just have the delegates in Parliament. They're little toadish, obsequious suck-ups and butt kissers. That's why they're not recognizable as politicians, why they don't have any ideas. They're just asking from the top of the digit game, what should they do? What should they say? What should they not do? Should we just keep on doing what we've been doing? What should we do this more? This is what they do. They're just going back and forth, carrying the water, the piss of these demonically obsessed, vain, glorious, wanting to be worshipped, delusional beasts. They don't show themselves. They don't feel like they have. It's not good for the business model to present themselves publicly, of course, because certainly they're so wealthy because they're so damn competent. So, and being competent is what politicians should be, because it really is about national security at the end of the day. But if you have these people that won't even show themselves but are apparently the most wealthy, then don't they finally, doesn't the buck stop with them? Aren't they the leaders above the so-called leaders in this so-called parliamentary system, which is manifestly corrupt, malfunctioning, stupid, hideous, mismanaged? So is there a protection racket at some point, like between them and the public, that some open and fair society should know about? So that we can see the whole chain of command all the way up to the top. So we can apply our thanks and praise on these people that apparently so demand it, and yet are so duplicitously out of the public eye. Or maybe it's just choice events, such as behind walled terraces or moats. It's only a couple of hundred people ever invited to some event, but certainly not the general public or the people living under their invisible rule. And yet to have all those damn digits, there must be a lot of paper trails, you would think, that at the end of the day one would lead to some questioning about this thing or the other, or if they really think that being a plutocracy has ever worked out well in the history of the world, and if so, if they could perhaps produce the evidence of that. Or will they fall into some self-serving narrative, which is pretty common, shall we say, common, written, all capitalized, a common point of view. Common because it's vulgar, but not because it's a good thing or accurate. Self-serving narratives. A greedy person with a self-serving narrative is that. Would that be surprising? Like, would someone say, "No, wait a second. Here's another one. Why is he doing this? Why is the greedy person throwing out one self-serving narrative after the other? Why does he do this? Why? It's so baffling." Or is it really? Is it so predictable? Does it not indict them? And then it's a question, what type, if we are talking about crimes, like what is the level of crime? Like if we throw someone for 10 years into a prison for stealing $20,000, then what would you give? What type of sentence would be suitable or appropriate for these billionaires that have misappropriated the future of what was the most civilized country on earth? What would be the possible sentence for the 171 denizens of the big red double-decker loony bus? How about that? Put them all in that one of those buses and just have it go driving through all of the towns to serve as some type of message to even the commonest of vulgar four-legged beasts that this was the stupidest thing that was ever allowed to happen in the United Kingdom. And then just think, how many of those so-called assets could then be distributed in such a way that it makes sense for the future? Whereas 171 loony birds aren't needed anywhere at any time. Never were, never will be. They won't defend their riches in a public forum. Why not? Challenge them to a debate. So we've identified the 171 loony birds. All of you come down. We're going to have a television, a debate that's going to last 72 hours. And all of your people, not the lawyers, mind you, not the body doubles, not the security people, not the horse training crew, groundsmen, none of that, but the patriarch or dowageress that is in that number, the 171. We're going to start with the top. And then there's going to be a lot of questions, like the public, just general questions fielded by the public for hours on end. Wouldn't that be a thing? Wouldn't that be a hootenanny, as they say? Wouldn't that be educatory? Would that be enlightening? And yet you would think these greedy people, that they would reflect at some point and reform and revise their ways. Maybe figure out a way not to be in that number. Oh, this year there's only 140. Because the smartest of the bunch exited somehow. And not just from public view, but from all things that could possibly have any influence on public life or industry. But the rest of the dummies, they get to go in the big red double-decker until it gets down to maybe a cabbie size. It can happen, why not? People can start taking drugs, people can stop taking drugs, people can start on the digit game, can be born into the digit game, and they can get out of the digit game. And that doesn't mean creating another proxy, because that is corny. It doesn't work. It's not funny. If one of them does that, you need to consider that contempt of court. And just think of the amount of what that really does then convey. What does that mean? That means a court has come to a just decision and they're in contempt of it. So at that level, you really do have to think what would be an appropriate response. I don't think it would be like a financial kind of punishment. Can you imagine? $100 million. We're giving a judgment for $100 million against this billionaire. You think that's appropriate? It's not. So if the court decides on that, then you need to fire the court, right? Find a court that understands the connection between crime and punishment. For example, crimes that aren't crimes that shouldn't be punished aren't, but crimes that are crimes that might not legally be provable to be one because the system itself has been put on its head by these people with the wrong values, the digit values. So yeah, there's a dilemma there, but there's just a dilemma only in the sense that it's possible that you could come up against multiple layers of subterfuge, multiple vectors. When you're dealing with people that have these types of options in a worldly sense. But the number is definitive. See, people that use numbers, you can define them by the numbers. So do that. But let us also return for a moment to the inherent defectiveness of this current system, which allows for 171 Roman-like gods on earth amongst us. They have no accountability because they are also not public. So then just imagine if you're dealing with illicit financial shell games and globalization, that part of that means that maybe even 170, like perhaps a majority of them aren't even from the United Kingdom originally. Perhaps it's global capital that drove them in like some type of fecal driftwood. And now they've congregated and stacked themselves up and are leveraging different positions. And because money is God, they don't have to, they can spend money to be out of the public eye. So imagine that. You have Roman emperors or African dictators, or Asiatic warlords in the back seats behind different curtains, peering out with their little bifocals, having no public scrutiny at all. How do you think that system will evolve if there's no accountability for wealth that is then funneled into political malfeasance, farce, sham, inauthenticity? And then what are the consequences of that long term? So perhaps if you have been diagnosed with lice, for example, or bed bugs, then you need to address that issue first. And apparently that's the malaise, that's the Dutch disease. That's the Dutch disease plus that the United Kingdom is dealing with. So how do you deal with a meta problem like that, which is a systemic problem, which is a global problem, which is a deception problem and a deliberate obstruction problem, and a impunity problem. Because we have to also assume that these global players that came in via legal means that are technically illicit, that they might be rule breakers amongst them. They might just think, again, because perhaps they're greedy, it does indicate that it is greed that motivates them, that they would want to have more of the country that they have infected with their toxic capital. So I think a department could be put together of specialists, certainly some accounting specialists, and then people, data specialists that can track these flows and then start identifying, putting two and two together between malign financing and malign influence. And I think that in the Venn diagram, you're gonna have that nice little segment where perhaps like 171 names fall into a bucket. Coming back to the United Kingdom for a moment, there's a book that's come out called Butler to the World, and what it delineates is how the UK, after the Suez Crisis, didn't really have, or decided not to, be in the world security game, and so it went into the world financial services game. And it involves apparently all the offshore infrastructure, which, is, here's the problem. Like, I understand some people might have profited by that, but you're also getting illicit businesses that are using that for counter social campaigns that could be considered even warlike, in a sub-warlike category, as a gray zone area. Which is why there was always financial oversight, at least as far as national infrastructures went. There was the understanding, at least in the Middle Ages, but until quite recently, that managing one's finances as a national entity is essential. And yet, through various complicated shell games and fronts and what have you, different layers of facades, they were able to wash it in some way that sounded plausible, such as financial industry. It's the investment game. And so that was big in culture in the 80s, for example. That took off big. At least probably it was funded like a Ponzi scheme is. Usually in the beginning it pays out the people that bought in first. They're the ones, the insiders, they make a lot of money. And they start in the beginning and they make enough and exit. And either they receive from private life or they don't. But usually within a lifetime they stay consistent that the game worked for them, so it was good politics. They have this type of naive idea, so they can be very convincing. Yes, this is good for me, so it must be good for you. But in fact, when you don't have oversight on a financial level, your whole country and industry and all other productive areas of your society can be invaded via foreign capital, via foreign actors that are criminal in nature. You're giving them access and an advantage over your native citizenry. You're giving them a supercharged advantage. And then people that have a track record of misusing and disrespecting legal safeguards, you're more or less selecting for that type of personality and then allowing them to become tremendously wealthy. And so to understand that level of threat, like what the debilitating effects of that type of mechanism can cause, is where we came up with the word to describe it, which was exterminationism. So think about it. We in the industrial sector, for example, when engineering large chemical plants, you can distill various substances that normally are not dangerous, but when you distill and separate them, and then you let's just say one pipe is dripping, and it's congregating some type of chemical that causes a thermic reaction, which means it bursts into flame, but traditional things to put out fires won't work on it. So when you try to pump the water on top of it, it spreads out. In fact, it reacts with the oxygen in the water itself, H2O, and it latches onto that molecule. And in fact, you make the situation worse. So we have counterintuitive attacks. Our base assumption was people with money are good people. But that's only because they were following the rules. The people with money that don't follow the rules also have money, but they're the worst people. But when you stand one side by side, both are rich, the normal person is just going to make the most naive of assumptions. So on top of that, in order for all of that to work, they needed tons of accountants and tons of legal people. And so then you had the trifecta of bad money plus bad law plus bad economic screens. And then you made all of those sectors extremely wealthy and extremely important and extremely influential all at the same time. And then you let that happen for decades without public scrutiny. Because for those things to work, there needs to be PR campaigns that just exclaim how great everything is, how everyone's getting wealthier, and in fact, the reality doesn't match the propaganda, but the propaganda is produced because they own the propaganda producers, which are the media organs. And it's not considered political because it's within the realm of lobbying, because it's just about financial interests, it's not about political interests. You see how people can split these things up in two, even though they belong together holistically? That economic policy is a political decision that is assumed to be based on the benefit of the majority, and yet here we see, lo and behold, as history would show us, we have a minority interest conducting fleecing operations. They're taking more than they give back. And they have consistently diminishing returns because they're destroying the thing that they're robbing, oddly enough. They're just claiming not to be doing that, oddly enough. Or they're daft enough to believe that that's not the case, oddly enough. Because they are all in on self-serving and self-rationalizing narratives, and so they're out of control. Their values are predation. And because they don't have the values to grow things, because that's not what they were self-selected for, then what they do is predate on things, attack things better than themselves, as some type of way of getting some type of revenge for not having the values that they think you should have, which is complete subsequence, complete surrender, complete slavery, as their despotic desires and will would have it be, at least to the extent that they can exert their influence. And with that much money, They can exert a lot of influence all at the same time in a lot of places, with a lot of people working for them in an economy that requires a lot of people to work or starve. And if they can take out the competition by bankrupting it via legalistic, cultural, or monetary means, then that's how they do it and have been doing it. It's just you haven't been seeing it in that light because you've been following the bright side narratives that they put out, because that's the extent of their strength, to project their false narratives to be the dominant ones in spaces, especially the open spaces. See, the public spaces, those are spaces that they just want to have you appear to be public, but in actuality they have speech codes, certain things you don't discuss, because of course as a free and open society we don't tolerate discussing billionaires, right? Our paymasters. That would be so rude. Because just like criminals, they don't want any type of repercussions for what they do. If they rob your house, they don't want to go to jail. If they are never found, if it's never found out how they operate or what they did, they're perfectly content to live that way. In fact, that's their preferred way of living. So don't think that real good values are acknowledged in any way by their side. But as they know that's why they're not real public about what they do. So if you bump into one of these people, don't be surprised when they're using euphemisms and abstract ways of talking, because they're not really about justifying themselves to people that they don't believe exists any type of equality or any type of admiration, certainly, as they are in the digit game, and your digits aren't over their digits. So what you say really doesn't make an impression on them. And so that's the basic inhumanity of and the doltishness of their operations. The doltishness of it should never be underestimated. You can doltishly suffocate someone. Criminals do it. Doesn't always work out perfectly. We think people who are really into performance, we think that they're accomplished at what they do. Not really. It's really just oafish mishandling of things that start happening in complex systems based on their having the wrong values. So you see it not directly but indirectly as things start falling apart, because you have bad people who aren't capable of managing the thing, and then the results of that bad management manifest themselves physically in some form or another, such as demographic decline. I think that's a great indicator. It's very complex. Like, think of all the things that go into maintaining good relationships, especially with women of all people. And then the children, and then having to be able to feed those children, and then having to school those children, and then those children not being predated upon by bad culture, toxic culture. And when one little thing doesn't happen in that complex social process, or you have some type of administrative class that's all into taxing the wrong types of people, making things all types of difficult because they have a kickback on some type of administrative bloat as part of the perennial toxic blob, and that they just don't care because they're not anywhere close to the rules of a market economy, because that's not how they live as bureaucrats, as mandarins, the neo-mandarins of paper shufflers. Because that's what it denigrates to. That's where you see the lack of leadership. The political class just becomes zombified. So if you see that, there's just like not a lot of thinkers. There's a lot of people inhabiting positions, but if you ask them like some basic things, and then you find out they never read a book. They read, I don't know, so just one bad magazine. And they shake their head and they sort of look into the in front of them like dazed. Well, then this is a zombified government. So then it's a question, if this is the extension of it, how many links do you go back to some type of dictatorial criminal fool that is exercising his or her despotism at the sake of genuine development or advancement or genuine good things. Like the opposite of that is a genuine bad thing, proliferator. So imagine that, like if you're a farmer, instead of sowing the fields with high quality grain, you're sowing it with, these people are the human equivalent of weed spreaders. So they've got just like all these like these lion's teeth, right, blowing in the wind. So in effect, they want to create the type of immoral, money-obsessed personality that they represent. And yet, ultimately, it's a destructive, self-defeating dead end. But because their vanity doesn't admit them to be wrong, they demand on projecting their distorted personality into the cultural spheres they want to dominate the culture. Because money is power, and really, if they have all the money, why shouldn't they have all the power? And this is the power to express themselves as the detriment that they are. So good systems keep these types of people out, does not reward them. That repurposes whatever they've stolen and then puts it to the right things. Now, how do these people avoid being labeled as greedy? Well, they found charities, right? So then publicly they're only giving away money, but in fact it's a pittance when compared to how much they've stolen. In fact, it's quite obnoxious if you think about it. But it's weird how it works on normal folk that don't have any comparisons, that don't know the extent of the villainy, the extent of the self-deception that is the precursor to the deception itself. So no, it's not good. That's the simple conclusion. It's not strong. You see, what is strong? Like a strong reaction. Imagine that, like to something good. Like imagine if, would you call yourself having a good reaction if you drink pure water and you have a strong bad reaction to it? Who's bad in that case? Is it the water? But because these people are so drilled with their egos, they're so drilled with their concept of self, they will not let go. They want to prove the world wrong when the world is right. At least the right society, the right group that they just incessantly attack. They will only tolerate slaves. Only tolerate those that accept their values, that succumb to them. So certainly, yes, avoid that type of company if you can. And if you're part of that company, change. You can do it. I know you can. You change your mind about different things every day. I wanted to wear this, and now I'm going to wear that. I was going to go down as an infamous villain, and I turned up from the nosedive. I glided to a wonderful spot, got out of the plane, and went off into the sunset, just perfectly uh, well, because I got the right map. Like, I was looking at the wrong map, now I got the right map. So the GPS is pointing me straight to the inferno of hell. So whoops, let me do a U-turn real quick, because I thought I was going in the right direction, but your navigation was hacked by the people that were going there in the first place and wanted you to go there too. But when you correct course based on the correct map, that's great for you. And it's great for others too. It's great for us all. Now that also means just don't give it away. You know, that's not the point. Although giving it away is real quick, but doing the right thing with it is also pretty skillful. It's a different kind of problem. A lot of people don't have that problem. Everyone's saying right out there right now, I wish I had that problem. Believe me, no you don't. It's a special type of problem. Now, if you would depict the loutish norm, you would be in a worse spot, perhaps. So these things I would not take lightly. But it can be done. It has been done. Lewis Carroll. Read some Lewis Carroll. There's so many stories like that. Finally, it's always a good idea to end on a note of compassion, knowing that it is very easy to err in this realm, that it is not normal to not be deceived, and there's really no shame in being deceived. A lot of these deceptions are very, very compelling, such as the one that if I get rich or richer than the other person, then I'm better than them. It's very, very easy to fall into that ditch on some level. And yet that to just focus on those types of people is apex fallacy as well. Like, what about all the other people that don't even come close, that also bear some sense of responsibility for themselves, of course. Even if you are poor, that doesn't mean you need to live bad. Poor by what metrics? Do you have a lot of free time? Are you working for yourself? Do you not have to be bothered with the public? Are you reasonably healthy? Yes or no? Now, a lot of people, you have to realize, a lot of people that are extremely wealthy are also extremely busy. They're extremely occupied. Their mental landscape is occupied with all the things associated with wealth, all the contretemps, all the properties, all of this. It's not better. It's just different types of problems. And also just imagine the amounts of defilements people can get into. Greed, ill will, and delusion. It's just you have a greater scale of it. Greater ability to create bad as well as good. And so many have created bad results. And again, it's based on this filtering process that empowered these people so that some middle managers, some middlemen somewhere in some middle place could earn money. And so they facilitated this process. this transformation, this empowering of the bad elements. Oh, globally, by the way, it's a global operation. So imagine the type of malfeasance that is congregated there, like that came from bad backgrounds, bad beginnings, and also bad managers, so people that are managing or working in a legal process with illicit actors. So what type of level of complicity is there? Like, isn't that ipso facto proof that they're not qualified ethically for their positions? And yet that's what we have. We have a whole class, more or less, going to work for all of the worst aspects of greed. And then just imagine decades of that. So we're already 50 years into that, so we're looking at second and third generation fruits of that. And of course, morals have declined worldwide, and of course geopolitical actors have become more ambitious worldwide. They see a weakness. The weakness is through this money backdoor. And then, of course, you might be thinking of Mongolians or Indians or Pakistanis or, I don't know, Albanians or whoever else. Maybe it's the Russians too. So if they're doing that on the one front, but they're moving all their money into these other avenues, then you can imagine that they're equally detrimental, equally criminal, because it's criminal what the whole process is. So why shouldn't it be facilitated by criminals? And then we're looking at a change that's facilitated by criminals where they get extremely wealthy and the whole process of everyone else just getting reverted or recycled down into a modern form of slavery. Just complete economic ruin. Because really it's only economic ruin that forces people to even come into contact with them, because they're the only people that have money. They collapse the whole social structure. And even if a couple of pieces of bread roll their way, that's just fine. That's exactly what should happen. That's how doltishly myopic a lot of these bad actors are. And just let's not forget, a lot of them are coming from provincial places, but their international affinity for criminality pulled them up to the top, so to speak. So a lot of them come with a lot of old school, stupid, just shakedown racketeering schemes and want to implement it in sophisticated places, and they have, and they do, and the effect is debilitating, but not for them. They get supercharged, again, on a local level, but then it's pulled out through this international machinery. So it gets injected, and it also gets pulled out. And the sewage stays where they aren't. Like, so I guess they might not be living there. They might be living in better climates. But they fly back and forth probably. Now that we have jet travel too, it's not all that difficult, especially if you got like a jacuzzi on your mega planes that fly under the radar of political scrutiny. So I'm sure a bunch of them have tried it, are trying it, or think that's the way forward. I'm sure that's the case, but there is power in popular ideas. I think popular ideas don't really support their position. So it's really a question of then what direction people can evolve into. Now, of course, it's very important to understand the system you're living in before it can evolve. And I think the system needs to evolve from both places. That means the people who are involved in these shakedown schemes need to evolve. But if they don't, they can also get into some other type of business, or maybe not. You can give them ways out. And apparently they seem pretty entrenched, because they recently scuttled a very innovative piece of market technology integration. So, but we don't live in a perfect place. We'll never live on a perfect planet. And yet we can live better than we do. We can also, if we see we're going down into a bad direction, we can turn around and go back. We can change direction. It won't be difficult or won't be totally easy, but we have to change anyway. You don't build it for yourself. You don't build your fortress, your paradise this side of death, then that is your own failing, your own mistake, your own misperception. And there is a sorting in this plane. There are those descending as well as those ascending, both at the same time. That is the contemporary realm. As fast as I am shooting into the stratosphere of virtue, are my equivalent shooting into the depths of hell. And this is a judgment. This is a reality. This is based on the necessity of the rules this side of metaphysics. And you have the choice. You can deny it. You can pretend it's not happening. You can pretend that things like the self exist. Or you can adopt realities and put them into practice that will clarify these things for you and for others, which is what it means to be awake instead of just adrift, just asleep, just half dead. Isn't that strange that half of our day is spent in some state of total disability, unconsciousness? And yet we think when we're awake, we're truly awake. Where is that spectrum of reality between daydream and nightmares? That we find ourselves even on our best days, and yet we have here 8-year-olds that would tell their elders that they know more about life than someone who's lived within our plane of socio-economic, political, psychological reality in which we live. The virtues got a bad rap in our time. The virtues are good. They're the grouping of terms that mean goodness. And why? Because these principles lead to good results. It's that visceral. That's the way you need to understand it, especially if you're a worldly person. They will get you better results than you think because it's counterintuitive. It's not natural, it's not common, it's rare, it's specialized. It's the difference between talent and being talentless. Imagine we have a karaoke event and I sing in such a way that's so compelling, so hypnotizing, so charismatic, riders on the storm, that you just can't forget it. It's that good. Versus someone who shows up and creates like high-pitched, loud noises that are detrimental to thinking, let alone hearing. That's the difference between being awake and being victimized. And the path to being awake, all of that is virtue. That's how we've defined it. That's how it was defined. That's how virtues do exist. The reality of virtues, they bring you to that place of infinite bounty, infinite generosity, infinite compassion, infinite wisdom. It brings you there, quite unexpectedly so. But the worldly argument, it seems convincing, it seems serious, it seems plausible, but that's the deception. That's why everyone wants to see hate and they want to see greed, but they don't want to see deception because they don't see it. That's the nature of deception. It doesn't appear to be as problematic as it is, and yet if you didn't have deception, you wouldn't make all of these grievous mistakes. Finally, it's always a good idea to end on a note of compassion, knowing that it is very easy to err in this realm, that it is not normal to not be deceived. And there's really no shame in being deceived. A lot of these deceptions are very, very compelling, such as the one that if I get rich or richer than the other person, then I'm better than them. It's very, very easy to fall into that ditch on some level. And yet that to just focus on those types of people is apex fallacy as well. Like, what about all the other people that don't even come close, that also bear some sense of responsibility for themselves, of course. Even if you are poor, that doesn't mean you need to live bad. Poor by what metrics? Do you have a lot of free time? Are you working for yourself? Do you not have to be bothered with the public? Are you reasonably healthy? Yes or no? Now, a lot of people, you have to realize, a lot of people that are extremely wealthy are also extremely busy. They're extremely occupied. Their mental landscape is occupied with all the things associated with wealth, all the contretemps, all the properties, all of this. It's not better. It's just different types of problems. And also just imagine the amounts of defilements people can get into. Greed, ill will, and delusion. It's just you have a greater scale of it. Greater ability to create bad as well as good. And so many have created bad results. And again, it's based on this filtering process that empowered these people so that some middle managers, some middlemen somewhere in some middle place could earn money. And so they facilitated this process. This transformation, this empowering of the bad elements. Oh, globally, by the way, it's a global operation. So imagine the type of malfeasance that is congregated there, like that came from bad backgrounds, bad beginnings, and also bad managers. So people that are managing or working in a legal process with illicit actors. So what type of level of complicity is there? Like, isn't that ipso facto proof that they're not qualified ethically for their positions? And yet that's what we have. We have a whole class, more or less, going to work for all of the worst aspects of greed. And then just imagine decades of that. So we're already 50 years into that, so we're looking at second and third generation fruits of that. And of course, morals have declined worldwide, and of course geopolitical actors have become more ambitious worldwide. They see a weakness. The weakness is through this money backdoor. And then, of course, you might be thinking of Mongolians or Indians or Pakistanis or, I don't know, Albanians or whoever else. Maybe it's the Russians too. So if they're doing that on the one front, but they're moving all their money into these other avenues, then you can imagine that they're equally detrimental, equally criminal, because it's criminal what the whole process is. So why shouldn't it be facilitated by criminals? And then we're looking at a change that's facilitated by criminals where they get extremely wealthy and the whole process of everyone else just getting reverted or recycled down into a modern form of slavery. Just complete economic ruin. Because really it's only economic ruin that forces people to even come into contact with them, because they're the only people that have money. They collapse the whole social structure. And even if a couple of pieces of bread roll their way, that's just fine. That's exactly what should happen. That's how doltishly myopic a lot of these bad actors are. And just let's not forget, a lot of them are coming from provincial places, but their international affinity for criminality pulled them up to the top, so to speak. So a lot of them come with a lot of old school, stupid, just shakedown racketeering schemes and want to implement it in sophisticated places, and they have, and they do, and the effect is debilitating, but not for them. They get supercharged, again, on a local level, but then it's pulled out through this international machinery. So it gets injected, and it also gets pulled out. And the sewage stays where they aren't. Like, so I guess they might not be living there. They might be living in better climates. But they fly back and forth probably. Now that we have jet travel too, it's not all that difficult. Especially if you got like a jacuzzi on your mega planes that fly under the radar of political scrutiny. So I'm sure a bunch of them have tried it, are trying it, or think that's the way forward. I'm sure that's the case, but there is power in popular ideas. I think popular ideas don't really support their position. So it's really a question of them what direction people can evolve into. Now, of course, it's very important to understand the system you're living in before it can evolve. And I think the system needs to evolve from both places. That means the people who are involved in these shakedown schemes need to evolve. But if they don't, they can also get into some other type of business, or maybe not. You can give them ways out. At least as far as your country is concerned, I don't think the United Kingdom is a great place for those types of operations. So, but it's a question of how entrenched the remainders are. And apparently they seem pretty entrenched, because they recently scuttled a very innovative piece of market technology integration for their own sake. So there again we see what would popular be considered the wrong decision because it's counterproductive for the majority. In their case, they have a rationalization such as self-enrichment that makes the medicine go down with a lot of sugar. So you do have to be able to spot that type of enterprise or enterprisers. And yet, if you're on that level where you can pull things off like that, then there's usually many hands behind it. So, but we don't live in a perfect place. We'll never live on a perfect planet. And yet we can live better than we do. We can also, if we see we're going down into a bad direction, we can turn around and go back. We can change direction. It won't be difficult, or won't be totally easy, but we have to change anyway. The times force us to change, so why shouldn't we change for the better and make sure that these actors that play a major political influence are included in the process, so that should they take extreme positions, that they at least then have to explain themselves to the majority of well-meaning, well-thinking policymakers.